The concept of a random universe collapsed for Arthur Miller on a humid Tuesday afternoon in the heart of the Florida Everglades. He was a man of science, a retired actuary who dealt in the cold comfort of mathematical probabilities and predictable outcomes. But that afternoon, he encountered a stranger who shared more than just his first name and a penchant for solitude. They met at a roadside diner, a place where the air smells of old grease and the weight of the swamp presses against the windows. The stranger was sitting in Arthur's usual booth, wearing a t-shirt from a concert Arthur had attended 30 years prior in Seattle. When the man turned around, Arthur felt a visceral jolt of recognition that defied any biological explanation. The stranger began to speak, his voice a perfect sonic mirror of Arthur's own, recounting a specific childhood trauma involving a blue tricycle. He detailed the exact scar on Arthur's knee, hidden beneath layers of denim, and the name of a dog that had been dead since 1968. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a total synchronization of two lives that had never crossed paths. As the conversation deepened, Arthur realized this wasn't a prank or a case of mistaken identity, but a fundamental breach in reality. The man possessed a photograph of Arthur's mother, but in the picture, she was holding the stranger's hand in a park in Miami. The date on the back of the photo was a day Arthur remembered vividly as the day she went missing. This encounter set Arthur on a dark path of investigation into what he called the folding of time within the Florida Panhandle. He began to document cases where coincidence stopped being a statistical fluke and started acting like a deliberate, predatory force. He found that certain locations in the state acted as magnets for these impossible, overlapping events. Arthur's journals described the case of the Twin Cities paradox, where two families in different counties lived identical tragedies on the same night. Both houses experienced an electrical fire at 3:12 a.m., and both families lost a silver-gray tabby cat named Barnaby in the blaze. The insurance record showed that the furniture layouts in both homes were mirrored to the inch. The psychological toll on those who experience these coincidences is a slow erosion of the sense of self and independent will. If your life is being echoed by a stranger miles away, the value of your personal choices begins to evaporate into the humid air. Arthur noted that the witnesses often described a feeling of being watched by the architecture of the world. He turned his focus to the dream echoes, a phenomenon reported by commuters on the I-95 corridor between Miami and West Palm Beach. Dozens of drivers reported dreaming of a specific, non-existent billboard featuring a weeping child and a set of red coordinates. A week later, a sinkhole opened at those exact coordinates, swallowing a bus during the morning rush. The investigation became an obsession, as Arthur tried to map the grid of these occurrences across the flat, swampy landscape of his home. He believed that the high mineral content of the Florida soil was acting as a recording medium for human trauma. This theory suggested that coincidences were just the Earth replaying a stored memory at the wrong time. Official records are notoriously silent on these matters, often burying the reports under the labels of clerical errors or mass hysteria. However, deep in the archives of local sheriff departments, the pattern is visible to anyone brave enough to connect the dots. Files on missing persons often reveal that the victims were experiencing glitches weeks before they vanished. Arthur found a survivor, an elderly woman in Naples, who had met her own double 3 times throughout her long, secluded life. Each meeting preceded a monumental shift in global history, as if her personal coincidence was a bell ringing for a larger event. She told Arthur that the third meeting had occurred just that morning, right before he knocked on her door. The woman was terrified, not of the double, but of the silence that followed the encounter, a silence she described as unnatural. She claimed that after the coincidence happens, the world feels thinner, like a stage set being prepared for a different play. Arthur recorded her testimony, noticing that his own hands were starting to shake with a familiar, rhythmic tremor. He began to notice the repetitions in his own daily life. The same white van passing his house at the exact same second every day. The same song playing on the radio every time he turned the ignition, regardless of which station was selected on the dial. These were the warning shots of a reality that was starting to loop back onto itself. One night, Arthur received a phone call from his own landline while he was sitting alone in his dark, cluttered study. He answered it and heard the sound of himself breathing, followed by the sound of his own front door being unlocked. He sat frozen, listening to the footsteps on the stairs that matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat perfectly. The footsteps stopped outside his door, but when he threw it open, the hallway was empty and the air was freezing cold. This moment of rupture convinced Arthur that the coincidences weren't just accidents. They were a form of communication. Something was trying to bridge the gap between two identical versions of a single, fractured timeline. He tracked down the diner stranger again, only to find that the man had never existed in any government database or tax record. The diner employees remembered him well, but they described him as appearing translucent under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights. He had paid for his coffee with coins that had been out of circulation for over 50 years. The investigation moved to the mirror houses of the Florida Keys, where two identical structures were built by a man who lost his mind. Every event that happened in the East House was replicated in the West House, with a delay of exactly 4 minutes. If a glass broke in the kitchen of one, a glass would inexplicably shatter in the other shortly after. Arthur's final journal entry describes a terrifying realization about the nature of these encounters and the people involved. He concluded that we are not individuals at all, but different instances of the same program running in a closed, dark loop. The coincidences are simply the points where the program overlaps and reveals its internal, mechanical structure. The authorities eventually found Arthur's house abandoned, with his journals spread across the floor in a perfect, concentric circle. There were no signs of a struggle, but every clock in the house had stopped at the same millisecond at the same hour. His car was still in the driveway, its engine still warm, but Arthur Miller was nowhere to be found. What makes this case truly disturbing is that a second Arthur Miller was found 3 states away, with no memory of his life. He possessed the same journals, the same scars, and the same terrifying belief that he was being followed by himself. The two men were identical in every way, down to the DNA sequence and the fingerprints on the pages. The investigation remains a cold case, a ghost in the system that refuses to be explained away by simple logic or math. It serves as a grim reminder that our reality is far more fragile than we choose to believe during the bright hours of the day. Sometimes, the most frightening thing you can encounter is a version of yourself that you didn't create. As the sun sets over the Florida swamps, the patterns continue to emerge. For those who are unfortunate enough to see them, a name whispered in a crowd, a face in a mirror that isn't quite yours, a dream that arrives in the mail. These are the threads of a tapestry that is being woven in the dark, far from our sight. We are left to wonder if we are next in the sequence, waiting for the coincidence that will finally pull us under the surface. The world is a vast machine of repetitions, and we are just the fuel that keeps the gears turning in the dark. Watch the people around you. Very closely today, you might recognize a story you haven't told yet. If you see someone who looks like you, do not approach them, and do not try to understand the logic of the meeting. Just turn away and hope that the universe hasn't finished its calculation for your particular life just yet. The silence of a coincidence is the sound of the world deciding your fate without your consent. The Florida dark files grow heavier with each passing year. As more people wake up to the reality of the repetitive grid, we are documenting the anomalies, hoping to find a way out of the loop before it closes for good on us all. But for now, we are just observers of the impossible, trapped in a state of permanent, quiet dread. Is it a glitch, a curse, or the true face of the world we inhabit when the lights are turned off and we are alone? The answer remains buried in the archives of those who disappeared after noticing the patterns were becoming too clear. Stay alert, for the next coincidence might be the one that finally explains everything you fear. The air in the Everglades is thick with the weight of these unanswered questions and the ghosts of those who sought the truth. We are walking on a floor of glass, looking down into a basement filled with the echoes of our own desperate voices. Every step we take is a gamble against the odds of a universe that doesn't play fair. Remember Arthur Miller, the next time you experience a moment of déjà vu that lasts a few seconds too long for comfort. It might not be a trick of the mind, but a signal that the other version of you is standing just around the corner. The world is small, but the darkness within it is vast and hungry for more. The investigation into the folding of time continues in the shadows of the Sunshine State, where the light hides more than it reveals. We will continue to pull the threads of these stories until the entire fabric of the lie finally comes apart in our hands. Until then, we keep the cameras rolling and the recorders on. The Florida sun is a mask for a place that is deeply and fundamentally unsettled by the laws of its own existence. Do not be fooled by the palm trees and the blue water. The abyss is always just a few inches below the sand. Trust nothing that repeats itself, for repetition is the primary language of the predator. In the end, we are all just sequences of events waiting for a collision that will define our place in the grand, dark design. The coincidences are the only truth we have left in a world that has forgotten how to be truly random. Sleep with one eye open, and listen for the sound of your own voice in the hallway. The reports of mere people in the Florida Keys have increased since Arthur's disappearance, suggesting the loop is gaining speed. More people are finding items in their pockets that belong to strangers they have never met in their lives. The grid is tightening, and the overlaps are becoming more frequent and more violent in their nature. We must accept that we are not the masters of our own narratives, but merely participants in a story that was written long ago. The coincidences are the clues left by a creator who wanted us to know that we are never truly alone. But that company is not the kind that offers comfort or safety in the middle of the night. The state of Florida remains a laboratory for the impossible, a place where the rules of physics are treated as mere suggestions. From the Panhandle to the Keys, the stories of the duplicate lives continue to haunt the local folklore and the police logs. There is no escape from a pattern that is woven into your very soul. As you close this video, look at the clock and remember the time, for it might be the last moment of your original life. The next time you see that number, it might be the start of the sequence that leads you to your own diner stranger. The world is waiting for you to notice the glitch and the static. The investigation of Arthur Miller's disappearance will never truly end, as long as there are those who remember his name. He is the patron saint of the coincidental, the man who looked at the math and saw the face of the void. We honor his memory by continuing to ask the questions that he died to answer. Stay vigilant in the face of the mundane, for that is where the most terrifying truths are always hidden from our sight. The dark is not just an absence of light. It is a presence that has its own agenda and its own timing. May you never find the photograph that proves you were never who you thought you were. The static is returning to the monitor, and the image of the man in the rain is starting to flicker and fade away. But the feeling of being watched remains. A cold pressure on the back of the neck that won't go away. The night is long, and the coincidences are just getting started for the evening. We are all part of the Florida dark now, whether we want to be or not, as the stories spread like a virus. Each witness adds a new layer to the mystery, and each coincidence brings us one step closer to the final collapse. The truth is a heavy burden, but it is the only thing worth carrying. The loop is closing, the patterns are forming, and the silence is descending upon the swamp and the city alike. Do not fight the feeling of recognition when it comes for you in the middle of a crowded, sunlit street. Just accept that the other you is finally here to take his turn at the wheel. This concludes our investigation into the impossible coincidences of the South. But the story is far from being over. We are just scratching the surface of a reality that is as deep as the ocean and as dark as the grave. The next chapter is yours to write, or perhaps it has already been written for you. What is your take on these nocturnal encounters? Have you ever experienced something inexplicable while working alone at night? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more dark archives, and leave a like if you respect the silence of the night.